Okay, we're holding by the Gemara on Yud Aleph Amud Beis on 11b. So to go quickly through the Mishnah that we had just done, there was a three-way machlokus essentially. Everybody agrees that on Erev Pesach we stop eating chametz at the 6th hour. Okay, at hour number 6 we stop eating, and that's when we have to dispose of the chametz. That's midrabanan, rabbinically. Everybody agrees that biblically, the truth is you have an extra hour until hour 7, because that's when the Karban Pesach starts, the Passover sacrifice starts, and that's when even midioraisa, all chametz is off the table. But Rabbi Meir says, therefore, you're allowed to eat chametz, all chametz up to and including the 5th hour, and then you stop, and in the 6th hour, everything starts getting forbidden, and you have to disperse the chametz. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, you stop eating the chametz at the end of the 4th hour. Hour number 5 of the day, it's a break. It's in Yiddish, nishtahin, nishtaher, not here, not there. You, in other words, you're allowed to have a no benefit from your chametz. You're allowed to give it to the animals, but you yourself can't eat it. And at hour 6, you dispose of the chametz. Rabbi Gamliel takes a nuanced position. He says hour number 4, you could eat chulin, the regular non-sacred food. Hour number 5, you can still eat truma and kachim, because you're not allowed to. Since you're really legally allowed to, you shouldn't simply dispose of holy food when you could eat it. And hour number 6, you stop. That's where we are. And now we're up to the Gemara. Now, the Gemara is about to take a left turn. For the moment, forget that we're learning Masechtas Pesachim, and now we are entering for the next, essentially 3/4 of a daf. We're entering into Masechtas Sanhedrin Daf Mem. All about witnesses in a capital case. What's a capital case? A case where that if the defendant is found guilty, he will be chayiv mises bezdin, one of the 4 mises bezdin, skilus reifa, right? All the different types of executions by in the courts. The way witnesses work in a capital case, there must be 2 witnesses. Api shnayim edim yokum adavar. But on the testimony of 2 witnesses will it stand. Not only that, but their testimony has to be such a testimony that you could theoretically question it back and forth. It has to be a testimony that's possible to have hazmana. That means to be able to be found to be false. That means we ask certain basic questions. Where were you? What time did it take place? Right? What year did it take place? What month did it take place? And all that, so that if a second set of witnesses show up, we can and say, no, these witnesses were with us within that time frame, we can find out that these witnesses therefore are not truthful witnesses. If the witnesses, if for whatever reason, as we're going to see, they cannot be hazmonod, meaning for what the witnesses say, I don't know, within a certain parameter of questions, their testimony is null and void, because if they say, I don't know, there's no way to contradict their testimony. Okay, that's the short and long. Why are we learning this here when it has to do with Pesachim? Be patient. Eventually, on 12b, on Yud Beis Amud Beis, the Gemara will then simply ask a question based on what we're about to learn for the next 3/4 of an hour. Zok the Gemara, bottom of Yud Aleph Amud Beis. The Gemara says like this: it's not Hassam. We learned over there in Sanhedrin regarding a capital case, regarding the witnesses. Echad oimer b'shnayim b'chodesh, that the alleged offense, the alleged crime took place on the 2nd of the month. Ve'echad oimer b'shloisha, and the second witness says, no, it happened on the 3rd month, on the 3rd of the month. A dosen kayemes, their testimony is still upheld and still because we say that the one who said it happened on the 3rd of the month knows that the previous month the Bezdin added an extra day to the month. As you all know, a Chodesh can either have 29 days. We know that Rosh Chodesh is either 2 days or 1 day. Back in those days, of course, they didn't know. And as we learned earlier in the Masechta, on the 29th, they sent out the fires. And on the 30th, it happened automatically when it was extended. So this witness knew that it had been extended, that it wasn't extended, or it was extended, and therefore it's this date. And this one does not know about the extension of the previous month. Since that's the case, each of the witnesses are off by 1 day on their knowledge of the day of the month. So we said that's a possibility. But if somebody says it happened on the 3rd of the month, and someone said it happened on the 5th, 2 days, their testimony is null and void. Why? Because we're willing to say that 1 month a guy doesn't know that the courts extended the month. We're not going to say that the guy doesn't know for 2 months that it was extended the month. He should have gone to shul and known already what's going on with Rosh Chodesh. He should have gone with a minyan, and he should have already known which was and when Rosh Chodesh wasn't. So again, where it's only a one day difference, we could attribute it to the guy's lack of knowledge of how long the previous month was. If it's a 2 day discrepancy, we say no good, because with the assumption that you wouldn't know about 1 month is fine. That you wouldn't know what was going on for 2 months, that we're not assuming. Gemara goes further. One witness says it happened in the 2nd hour of the day. The day is broken up into 12 hours. Hour number 6 is midday. So one witness says it happened in the 2nd hour of the day. No, it happened in the 3rd hour of the day. We say that their testimony is okay. But if one says it happened in the 3rd hour, that it happened in the 5th hour, so that we now have a 2-hour discrepancy, a dosa b'tela, their testimony is null and void. Divrei Rabbi Meir. That's what Rabbi Meir holds. Rabbi Yehuda, a dosa kayemes, no, their testimony is even upheld where one says it happened in the 3rd hour, one said it happened in the 5th hour, that there's a 2-hour discrepancy between the testimony of the 2 witnesses, still upheld. The idea being, of course, is that people are people, and people make mistakes, and when 2 people see a car crash, everybody sees it slightly different. More importantly, we're dealing in a time where people did not have a watch. They were telling time by looking at the sky and where the sun was at any given point. Obviously, in a case where you're looking at a crime scene and you're a witness to a crime scene, it's an emotional experience, especially when we're dealing with a capital crime. Number 2, if you're giving witnesses, if you're staring at a situation and you're looking at what's going on, you're clearly not looking at the sky and seeing where the sun is. So there's room for error. Further, now Rabbi Yehuda goes further. He says not only is a 2-hour discrepancy good, but echad oimer b'chamisha, ve'echad oimer b'shiva. But if one says that the alleged crime took place in the 5th hour, and the other one says it took place in the 7th hour, even though it's only a 2-hour discrepancy. And I just said that a 2-hour discrepancy is okay. Here, a dosa b'tela, their testimony is null and void. Why? Chamisha chama b'mizrach. Because in the 5th hour, the sun is in the east. The sun rises in the east and is still coming across the east. B'sheva, by the 7th hour of the day, chama b'marav, the sun is already in the west. It's begun its descent. Hour number 6, and this is important for what's coming, is when the sun is right up in the middle. There, it's never clear. It really depends upon where you're standing at any given point. But the difference between hour number 5, when the sun is in the east, and hour number 7, when the sun is in the west, and again, this is how they told time, that's too much of a discrepancy. And even Rabbi Yehuda says you can have an error between people of up to 2 hours. That's only within the same time frame, in the first 5 hours of the morning, or in the evening, or as the sun is beginning to set, but not between the 5th hour when the sun is clearly in the east to the 7th hour when the sun is clearly in the west. Then you should have been able to tell time, and that's it. So now the Gemara says, Amar Abai, Kishanim Saloima, if you look carefully, the Divi Rameya, Eid Adam Toya V'loy Klum. The truth is, according to Rameya, you can work out the situation where the people are not erring at all. The Divi Rabbi Yehuda Adam Toya Chatisha, but if you analyze Rabbi Yehuda, you can work it out that the actual differences between them is only a half hour. The Divi Rameya ain't Adam Toya V'loy Klum. According to Rameya, that the truth is, if you look at it, people are not really, there's no discrepancy. Ma'isiki have the alleged crime happened. Mipik tarte ume'ale to loss. Either when the 2nd hour was ending or the 3rd hour was beginning. So the one who says 2 hours meant the end of the 2 hours. He meant at the beginning of the 3rd hour. So we're really dealing with the same time frame. The alleged crime happened like this. It was the middle of the 4th, meaning 4.5 of the day, which is and the one who said it happened in the 3rd means it happened at the end of the 3rd hour, which is the beginning of the 4th hour. Which means that he errs by a half hour too early. He says it happened around at the end of the 3rd hour, the beginning of the 4th, when in fact it happened at the 4.5 hours into the day. And the other guy says just the opposite. And the other one says it happened at the 5th hour, meant at the beginning of the 5th hour. And again, he erred by a half hour, that he was late by a half hour. Again, it needs to be pointed out. We're dealing at a time where they told time by the sun. There were no watches and no clocks. Therefore, in truth, there were no minutes. You couldn't time it. You couldn't have it like we do today. 807, 808. We're used to a digital world, right? There was no digital world. So it was much harder for Pacific time to come to be done. So therefore, there had to have been some leeway for discrepancies. Ikiti Amri, there's another version of Abaya. Amar Abaya, in this version, he says like this, that a person can make a mistake, a slight error between the two witnesses. The Divi Rabbi Yehuda Adam Toya Show Mashu. If you take a look at it, the witnesses are erring by an hour and a bit. The Divi Rabbi Adam Toya Mashu, according to the man that a person errs slightly, the alleged crime happened like this, either at the end of the 2nd hour or at the beginning of the 3rd hour. So therefore, one of them is slightly off. One of them even said the 2nd hour and the 3rd hour. It's a slight difference between, let's say, 2:45 and 3:15. Somewhere in there it happens, so there's a small difference. The Divi Rabbi Yehuda, or 2:55 and 3:05. The Divi Rabbi Yehuda Adam Toya Shom Ashu. The Yehuda, it says they error with an hour, and the alleged crime could have happened like this: either at the end of the 3rd hour or at the beginning of the 5th hour. So, top of Yud Beis Amid Aleph, therefore, one of them erred slightly a bit, a little more than an hour. The guy who says at the end of the 3rd, when it really happened by the 5th, at the beginning of the 5th, or the guy says at the 5th, when it happened really at the end of the 3rd. So the Gemara says, 1 minute. Right now the Gemara it says, let's analyze this. Also, Rav Huna Berei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Huna, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, went for Amru Nishmati Kamei Rava and repeated Abayi's statement to Rava. Omar. So Rava said, let's see. Uma elu dekaikino bahai sadi. Now, if we would go ahead and examine these witnesses, examine these edim, what are we going to find? That the one who said 3 didn't mean the end of 3. He might have meant the beginning of the 3rd hour. And the one who said it happened in the 5th hour, what he really meant that it happened at the end of the 5th hour. So in other words, when one says 3rd hour and one says 5th hour, it could very well be that the 3rd hour meant the beginning of the 3rd hour and the 5th hour meant the end of the 5th hour. That's a spread of almost 3 hours. That's a too huge a spread. That would be contradictory testimony. That would be testimony that can almost not be reconciled. Beginning of the 3rd, the end of the 5th, you're dealing with almost a 3-hour stretch, right? We can't put, heaven forbid, put somebody to death based on testimony that's almost 3 hours apart. Now you want to go and execute, you want to go ahead and accept such witnesses and execute out of doubt because you want to say when the guy said 3, he didn't mean the beginning of the 3. He really meant the end of the 3. And the guy who said it happened in the 5th hour didn't mean the end of the 5th hour. He really meant the beginning of the 5th hour. So that there's only about an hour, a little more than an hour difference. Who said that's what they meant? It's very possible that they meant the one who said it happened in the 3rd hour really meant that it happened in the beginning of the 3rd hour. The one who said it happened in the 5th hour really meant the end of the 5th hour. If that's the case, the spread is almost 3 hours. So you don't know really what they meant. And if you don't really know what they meant, you're going to come and go ahead on a death. You have an uncertainty on what they meant. And you're going to go, heaven forbid, and give the death penalty. But the Torah says, the Shaftu Ada, and the congregation shall judge, the Tzilu Ada, and the congregation shall save. And here we need to make the point. The Torah Kadesha commands us to try to find any which way not to give the death penalty. And as it says in many places in Shas, a bezdin, a court that kills, that executes somebody once in 70 years, is called a bloody bezdin, a bloody court. Because even, as Ramosha explains, says even though the Torah says chayiv misa, chayiv misa, chayiv misa, put to death, put to death, put to death. That's only to tell us how how bad, as it were, this loisase, is this forbidden act. But the reality is, if you analyze it, you have to there has to be 2 witnesses. The 2 witnesses have to tell the potential perpetrator, they have to give him hasra, they have to give him a warning. They have to tell him, this is what you're about to be over with, and this is the punishment. The potential perpetrator has to tell them, I hear you, has to acknowledge that he got the warning, and he still has to do the crime. They still need to see the crime. And under these circumstances, he probably has a good sign of temporary insanity. The point is, the Torah in its actuality of what you have to do in order to be able to carry out the death penalty is clearly against the death penalty. And Ramosha explains, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not want us to come to him out of fear. In truth, he wants us to come to him out of love.
It's like when we learn about a Ben Sara or Mara.
Same idea. Exactly. Finish up the thought, Charlie. Exactly.
No, I'm just saying we learned, doffs and doffs, and in the meantime, it said that maybe no one was ever killed for being a Ben Sara.
It's more than that. Do you know who makes him into a Ben Sara Mara? It's only the parents.
I know. There's no mother.
And they label him.
Testified against
right.
him.
They have to testify that the kid is a Ben Sara. What parent is going to testify that they? In other words, the parent labels the kid. Exactly.
Sometimes, I don't know. Anyway, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. We were all teenagers once upon a time. That's the way it goes. And Klape Shemaya, in the eyes of God, we're still all teenagers. Don't forget that. So, Zakti Gemara, Elo Amarava, Ledivre Rameya, Adam. So Rava says, Elamai, we've got to look at this different. The possibilities that people will err. Again, they're looking at a crime scene. It's emotional. It's a capital case. They're not looking at the sun. They're not picking their heads up and looking at the sun, because if they're looking at the sun, they're not looking at the case, which means they're not looking at the potential crimes, which means that they wouldn't be able to do testimony. So he said, therefore, the truth is, the possibility for error is longer than 1 or 2 hours. Elo Amarava, L'divrei Rabbi Meir, Adam toyish shtei shoyis chosamashu. Rameya errors slightly. According to Rameya, a person, there could be a discrepancy of up to slightly less than 2 hours. The Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, Adam toyish sholosh shoyis chosamashu. According to Rabbi Yehuda, you could almost get to 3-hour discrepancy between the two testimonies. The Divrei Rameya, Adam toyish shtei shoyis chosamashu. According to Rameya, there could be a discrepancy of slightly less than 2 hours. The potential crime over here could have happened either at the beginning of the 2nd hour of the day or at the end of the 3rd hour of the day. The testimony would still be valid. At worst, one of them erred by slightly less than 2 hours. Either the beginning of the 2nd or the end of the 3rd is slightly less than 2 hours. The Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, Adam toyish sholosh shoyis chosamashu. People can make a mistake up to slightly less than 3 hours. The possible crime happens either at the beginning of the 3rd hour, or at the end of the 5th hour. So what you have is a spread of slightly less than 3 hours. And one of them at worst is slightly off by slightly less than 3 hours, but that's possible. So now, Zakti Gemara, Tanah, we learned. If I get stuck, someone let me know, because I got that thing again. My internet connection is slightly no good. Tanah, now here's the situation. If you remember, I started the day and I said we have to question the witnesses. There are 2 types of questions. There are chakiros and bedikos. Chakiros are the 7 basic questions that we're about to do, that essentially asks, where were you? Where did it happen? What time did it happen? All the types of questions that try to fix the time and place of the crime and put the witnesses at the place of the crime. The reason for these questions, chakiras, because then you could do hazmana, because then you could say the witnesses essentially are testifying on themselves. We were here at this time, on this day, in this month, in this year, so on and so forth. And other witnesses can then come and say, wait a minute, no, they were out bowling with us. They couldn't have been there to see the crime. Okay? The second set of questions is known as the bedikos, and those are supplementary questions. What kind of clothes was he wearing? Was it raining? Was it not raining? So on and so forth. Those types of questions, that they're, so in the first set, say, I don't know. In the supplementary questions, it's saying what color clothes they were wearing, what shoes they were wearing, what was the weather on that day, right? Was it cold? Was it hot? Those they can, they can say, I don't know, okay? Because that's not so much, that's us trying to figure out a way to protect the defendant as much as possible, but that's the main questions are the chakiras. And here's the Gemara. Tanan, we learned. They would examine the Eidim, the witnesses, with the 7 chakiras, the 7 standard questions. Be'ezeh shavua, in which Shemitah cycle did this take place? In which of the 7-year cycle? As you know, the Jewish calendar is broken out into 7 cycles, 7 Shemitah cycles. which on the seventh year you weren't allowed to plow the ground, you had to let it grow fallow and let it renew itself and that year you spent with the Rabbi Shalom, 7 times 7, and the 50th year was Yovel. So they asked the person, which one of the 7 years did this happen in? In which cycle? Cycle 1, cycle 2, cycle 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Why are they asking this? The answer is there's no statute of limitations on capital cases. There are no statute of limitations. So we may come to this case 10, 15 years after it took place. Okay? Keep that in mind. So, Be'ezes Shavua, which 7-year period did you see this alleged crime? Be'ezes Shana, in which year of the 7-year period? So if you say, I saw it in the first of the 7-year period, knew which year within that year. I saw it in the second year. Be'ezes Shana, Be'ezes Chodesh, which month in the year of which cycle? But Be'ezes Yom, which day of the week did you see it? Be'ezes Shah, in what hour did you see it? Be'ezes Mokim, and what place did it take place? The basic 7 questions, which honestly are still used to this day, except of course for the first question, Be'ezes Shvuah, in which 7-year period. But all the other ones are the who, what, when, and where. Not the why, the who, what, when, and where's questions. Now, Vitana, and we learn further. Ma ben chakiris lebedikos. What is the legal difference between the 7 basic questions and then the supplementary bedika questions, like what clothing was he wearing, what was the weather? Chakiros, the standard 7 questions, echad mehen on any day. If one of the witnesses say, I do not know, a dosam betela, their testimony is immediately negated. Vidika in the supplementary questions, what was the color of the clothes? What was the weather? Even if both witnesses say, Ein anu yoidim, a dosan kayemes, their testimony is still valid. Vazinim Bey, and we asked them about this Mishnah, there in Sanhedrin, Daf Mem Aleph on the base. What's the difference between the standard 7 questions and the supplementary questions? And we answered, that in the chakiras, in the standard questions, even if only one witness says, I don't know, the testimony is negated, as we explained before. Because it's a testimony that cannot be refuted through hazmana. What is hazmana? We have to have case, in other words, with the ability of a second set of witnesses to come and say, excuse me, I can tell you this, that on this month, on this day, in that year, we were out in Las Vegas. We weren't here. They weren't here, they were with us. But if any one of those standard questions of where were you, when did it take place, what year, what, all of those, they say, anyone says, I don't know, so now you can't, there's no way to prove that it was wrong, right? You can't prove a negative, right? If that's the case, it's automatically the testimony is bottled, it is nullified. B'dika is the supplementary questions, what color are the clothes, for example, it's still a testimony that can be refuted because of the first 7 questions. You're right. Regarding the B'dika, you can't prove or disprove, and I don't know. But since the 7 questions must be answered, there's still room for the witnesses to come. So now answers the question that obviously has to bother us, which is going to lead us back to Masechtas Pesachim, back to our Masechta of the Pesach, but now that you say that people err, either according to Rabbi Meir, according to Rabba, almost 2 hours, and according to Rabbi Yehuda, they could err even almost 3 hours. If that's the case, then the standard question, the Chakira question of what hour it took place, right? Ezu Shah, what hour, right? It turns out that it's a testimony that you cannot refute through Azmana. Why? Because he could always say, if the other witnesses come and say no, and that he said he was there in the third hour? What are you talking about? He wasn't there, he was with us. Right? Oops, I made a mistake because you're giving him such a huge spread. You either gave him almost a 2-hour spread, almost a 3-hour spread. So after the Gemara, you're right. The second witnesses, when they're coming to contradict these witnesses, have got to testify about the entire almost 2-hour period or the entire almost 3-hour period. In order to go ahead and prove these witnesses false, they have to testify about the entire time. So in other words, if he says the third hour, that he saw it in the third hours, the witnesses have to come and say, no, in hour 3 and hour 4, he was with us bowling. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, they would have to testify for 3 hours, 3, 4, and 5, that he was with us instead of the thing. So Zakti Gemara, the Rameir, who says that a person can err up to 2 hours, Yavinu Lahu, the truth is we've got to give these second pair of witnesses that they have to testify how many hours the guys were with them. Yavinu Lahu mitchilas shari shaina atzayv chamisha. We're going to have to give them from the beginning of the first hour to the end of the 5th hour, because you got 2 hours going either way. If a guy says 3 hours and he can make a mistake, it happened in the 3rd hour and he said, I can make a mistake. 2 hours. That means you can make a mistake 2 hours back, or you can make a mistake 2 hours forward, which means that in reality, you got to give somebody, the other witnesses have got to testify that the entire morning the guys were with us and they weren't here, because the mistake could be either direction. Ubedinu the nosav lemi karetz fei. And by rights, we can even give him more, because let's say he testifies that it happened in the 2nd hour. Well, then that means 1 hour, the first, that he could have made a mistake. 2 hours going forward, it could have happened in hour 3 or hour 4. Or he could have made a mistake going 2 hours back, which is hour 1 and the last hour of the night. Between day and night, people don't mistake. It's one thing to make a mistake when it's sunny outside. Which hour is it? You could clearly tell the difference between when it's dark outside and when it's light outside. So that way, we don't go all the way back into the nighttime. But theoretically, we could, if you're going to go by the actual amount of hours that the second witnesses would have to testify, that the first witnesses were with them, so that their testimony would be known. The Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that says that people can make a mistake up to 3 hours. That means we would have to give him from the beginning of the first hour all the way to the 6th. Again, if he says at the beginning of the 3, it's 4, 5, 6. Either way, you essentially have to, the witnesses are going to have to testify that the entire morning, from early in the morning till midday, they were with us out fishing on the bay. You could even go even further, because obviously if he testimonied about the beginning of the 3rd or in the 2nd hour, and he makes a mistake of 3, if you go backwards, he'll end up in the nighttime. But as the Gemara says on the top of Yud Beis Amid Beis, on the 12b, Ella ben Yom L'Layla Lo To Inchi. But between night and day, people don't make a mistake. Now, and by rights, we should give the other witness more time ahead. Ella, the truth is, the other way, you could go ahead too. In other words, if he testified in the 4th hour, then you have 5, 6, 7, right? He can make an error all the way into the afternoon. Ella b'chamisha chama b'mizrach, except same idea. In the 5th hour, the sun is clearly in the east. Ub'sheva chama b'marav. And in the 7th hour already, the sun is already clearly descending into the western sky. So there again, at that point already, we're saying nobody's going to make that mistake. Just like they don't make a mistake between day and night, they're not going to mistake where clearly the sun is in the east or clearly the sun is in the west. Tanan. Now we go back to our Mishnah. Now that we've spent the last minute and a half in Sanhedrin, back to Masechtas Pesachim. Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah, Rameya said, on Erev Pesach, you can eat chametz for the whole entire 5th hour. V'soy from betchilas seish, and you burn it at the beginning of the 6th hour. Rabbi Yehuda says, Oichin kol arba, you eat chametz during the 4th hour. V'toilin kol chamesh, and you suspend it the entire 5th hour. You can only feed it to your animals. V'sarfim b'tchilas sheish, and you go ahead and you burn it at the beginning of the 6th. So therefore, both Rabbi Yehuda and both Rameh advance the biblical prohibition, which really starts at the beginning of the 7th hour with the bringing of the Korban Pesach, right? And they say that you got to stop eating chametz and you got to stop disposing of it by the beginning of the 6th hour, by midday. Why? In order, they were afraid, because otherwise you're going to make a mistake in timing, right? That's the whole reason why they moved it up. They moved it up. Even though biblically you can go until the 7th hour, they moved it up because they were afraid you were going to make a mistake and heaven forbid come to eat chametz in the biblically forbidden time. So Zakti Gemara, Le'abaya, who said that according to Rameya, people make a 1-hour mistake. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, people can make up to a 2-hour mistake. Le'abaya, Alibid Rameya, the Adam Eina, the Mataya Beloy Klum. First, he said that a person really doesn't make a mistake. Niu Kula Shish. In his first shot, he said really people don't make a mistake. It either happened at the end of the 2nd or right away at the beginning of the 3rd. Neichel Kula Shish, that let a person eat chametz the entire 6th hour, because clearly, according to Rameir, we're not worried about people making a mistake by a capital case testimony. We say we're not, Rameir, according to Abaya, said, I'm not worried. People really don't make mistakes. That's how we started off all the way at the beginning. So then by eating chametz, we should have the same thing. You should be allowed to eat chametz all the way through the 6th hour until right before the 7th hour when the biblical prohibition of eating chametz begins. And even according to the other version, which is the person errors slightly, he should be able to eat according to Rameh until 6:45, until 6 hours and 45 minutes into the day, and stop 15 minutes before, because people don't make mistake with time. Then goes further. Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi, the Omar Adam Chatzi Shah, that people make a mistake up to half hour with regard to testimony. In that case, even according to Rabbi Yehuda, you should be allowed to eat until 6.5 hours into the day. Why does Rabbi Yehuda say you have to stop eating after the 4th hour? You see, by a capital case, he allows, according to Abai, a difference in testimony of only a half hour. People make mistakes only up to a half hour. So in that case, when it comes to eating other chametz, we shouldn't have to worry about that. They're only going at 6.5 hours. We stop. So you give them the half hour where they might make the error in time, so that they don't get to the 7th hour in the biblical prohibition. Ulahak lishnin, according to the explanation, which was Nabi the other show mashu, that according to Rabbi Yehuda, the way Abaye explained it, that a person makes a mistake, an hour and a drop, then he should at the very least, according to Rabbi Yehuda, be allowed to eat until the end of the 5th hour. So you stop him on the 6th hour, slightly before the 6th hour. So you stop him at 5 hours and 50 minutes, and that's what he eats. Why does Rabbi Yehuda say by chametz you have to stop eating after the 4th hour? By a capital case, he doesn't seem to have the same problem. It's not consistent logically. Elam Rabaya. Now you know why we learned this whole Gemara in order to ask this question. Elam Rabaya, says Abaya, Edus Misura Lizerizim. Testimony is given over to Zerizim, conscientious people. People know that when they're giving witnesses, A, they're going to have to swear about their witnesses, and Jews are not easy about swearing. Number 2, they know that somebody's life is on the line. Number 3, we are the people of the book, which is another way to say we are the people of the rule of law. We established that idea of the rule of law. The law is everything. Everybody recognizes that people are very conscientious. A person that is not a conscientious person will not testify, because we have so many questions in so many different ways. Everybody knows it. It's only conscientious people that are witnesses. Chametz lakol ma'asa. Chametz is given over to everybody. Men, women, children, male slaves, female slaves, so on and so forth. since chametz is given over to everybody, not just the yekis of the world, but even the non-yekis of the world, not only the guys who get up at 6:45 to daven shachris, but even the guys who go to daven shachris at 12 o'clock in the afternoon. You can see I'm back in Brooklyn, right? So there you go. It doesn't matter. Chametz is given over to all. Therefore, Rameh and Rabbi Yehuda were much more concerned about chametz, an Arab taking place, than they were by the testimony by a capital case. The Rava, Liba de Rameya, and Rava, according to Rameya, who says the Adam Toyish Shtei Shoyis Chosamashu, that a person can make an error of slightly less than 2 hours. Why don't we let them eat chametz at least at the beginning of the 5th hour? So according, let them go eat what he called. They should eat. On the contrary, they should only be allowed to eat chametz only until the 5th hour. Rameya that says that they're allowed to eat the entire 5th hour. Why? According to Rameya, the way Rava explains, people make mistakes up to 2 hours, and the beginning of the 7th hour is the biblical prohibition of eating chametz, and you have to dispose. So therefore, roll back almost 2 hours, which is the beginning of the 5th hour. Rameya is allowing them to eat too much. It's not consistent in his way of thinking. So the Gemara, Chamesh Chama b'Mizrach, v'Sheva Chama b'Marav. Because in the 5th hour the sun is in the east, and the seventh hour, when the biblical prohibition starts, the sun is in the west. So Rameya says when it comes to chametz, you can let him eat the whole 5th. He's not going to make a mistake. You can tell when the 7th hour is coming. So pray to Gemara. If that's the case, let him eat in the 6th, because the sun in the 6th hour is where? Straight above. It's not to the west. In the 6th hour, the sun is in the middle of the sky, and therefore you can make an error. When it's in the middle of the sky, let's be honest, as you all well know, and if you see it in Boca Grove, actually, depending on which side of Boca Grove you're standing, it looks like the sun is on either side. If you take it from the east side of it, it looks like it's in the west, and from the west, it looks like it's still in the east. So it's not clear when it's in the middle. That a person makes the mistakes 3 hours, slightly less than 3 hours. According to Rameya, according to Rabbi Yehuda, a person should have to stop eating chametz at the beginning of the 4th hour. Why does Rabbi Yehuda give him the entire 4th hour to eat chametz? So he gives the same answer. In the 5th hour, the sun is in the east, and in the 7th hour, the sun is in the west. The kol shekain haba, and for certain, in the 4th hour, certainly not going to make a mistake if the sun is really in the east. So, if that's the case, then Rabbi Yehuda should allow us to eat chametz even in the 5th hour, because he shouldn't worry that we're going to make a mistake. The Gemara Targuma Abaya Aliba de Rava. Abaya explained it according to Rava. This Masurah is the reason. Testimony is given over to conscientious people, so they pay attention to the details. Chametz is given over to everybody, and in that case, it's given over to everybody. They're not as conscientious. That's not the Tam of Rabbi Yehuda, because he says no. Even if they're not conscientious, nobody's confusing the 5th hour with the 7th hour. The 5th hour, the sun is clearly in the east. In the 7th hour, the sun is clearly in the west. That's not the problem. So why does Rabbi Yehuda say you could only eat chametz in the 4th hour? El Rabbi Yehuda l'tamei the Omar ain't beer chametz elas sereifa. Rabbi Yehuda holds, like Rabbi Akiva, that disposal of the chametz is only through burning the chametz. And he says the Rabbanan therefore gave an hour to gather the wood to burn the chametz. So Rabbi Yehuda says you eat the chametz in the 4th hour, you gather the wood in the 5th hour, and you burn the chametz in the 6th hour. Zakti Gemara, but that's not so, because I'll show you Rabbi Yehuda where there's an exception to that rule. Eisvei Ravina l'Rava, Omer Rabbi Yehuda, Emasai. When do I say that chametz must be disposed by burning? Shalai b'shas bi'urai. If not at the time of the disposal, But before, that means during the entire 6th hour, when chametz is still allowed biblically, because the Korban Pesach can't be brought until the beginning of the 7th hour. So during the entire 6th hour, you're allowed to burn the chametz. Shaloi b'shas bi'urai, but not at the time. I mean, elo b'shas bi'urai, but at the time of disposal. That means you hit the 7th hour, and now it's biblically forbidden to eat chametz. Yesh b'isu b'chol davar. You eliminate it any which way you want. You can eliminate it any which way you want, which means if you mevatel b'liboy, you nullify it in your heart, and you take it and you lock it away in a closet, and that's it. So you see that even Rabbi Yehuda says you don't have to burn it; you can get rid of it any way you want, and therefore, what do you call it? This hour that you had to be given is not exactly true. So why, according to Rabbi Yehuda, if the sun is in the east of even in the 5th hour, why can't I eat chametz until that's all the way through the 5th hour? Because we're afraid it's going to get cloudy. If it gets cloudy, then we got a problem. If you're worried about clouds, maybe in the 4th hour also, you should worry. The 4th hour is the zman for everybody to eat the suda. Since it's the zman that everybody sits down to eat the suda, everybody eats in the 4th, and then they move on to getting rid of the chametz. We could stop over here.